I'd argue yes. The economic models that we have become used to, whether it's fascism or socialism or capitalism, they're all based on the concept of populations getting bigger and the pie getting bigger. It's just an argument over how you divvy up the pie. That's not the case anymore. Europe's been in terminal decline for 20, 30 years, Japan for 40, and China for 40. So within this next decade, we're going to be seeing a large number of countries, first and foremost China, where that aged bulk moves into mass retirement and beyond. We don't have an economic model for that. It's certainly not based on mass international transport of consumer goods for consumption, because you need young people for consumption, and that is no longer an option in about a third of the world. And about another third of the world is too poor to really move the needle. In my work, I don't really have a preference. Governing systems usually are a manifestation of the local culture as shaped by their geography. So United States is kind of the classic case of a hands-off government, because for most of our history, we didn't need a government. The land was inexpensive, the rains came regularly, agriculture was easy, transport was easy, and so the government only formed to do a handful of things that were needed as it was necessary. So we mustered up an army in order to fight our wars, but then we demustered them. We helped build a little bit of basic infrastructure linking our river basins, and then that was it. And then there were some protective tariffs on manufactured goods, and that's it. And honestly, it was like that until World War I. World War I was the first time where we had to make a significant change to our system, and that has carried on to this day. But that's one of the reasons why the United States ultimately has a light touch. I know it doesn't feel like that today, but compared to the rest of the world, the US has a very light touch when it comes to things like regulation. That's not how it works in Europe. In Europe, everyone's in everybody's faces all the time. There are always challenges, internal and external. And so whereas our government just kind of comes together as it's necessary, they have to have a government all the time. And if their government does not punch above its weight, if it's not professional, if it doesn't think forward, the country dies. So there's a pretty high bar there. We think of local government as where like nearly failed people sometimes go into. In Germany, that is the height of honor to serve in local government, because you decide what is allowed to work. We haven't professionalized it in the way that the Europeans have, because we haven't had to. I agree that would be a great direction for us to push into in the future. One miracle at a time. In China has a war government. The northern Chinese were kind of like Europe, all in each other's faces. And so they fought among themselves over and over and over for centuries, for millennia, to decide who could be in charge. And then they impressed their will on the rest of China. So they see governance as an occupation. It shapes who they are, and it shapes how they react to everyone else around them. And that's one of the fun things about governance, is you can have something that makes perfect sense for you, for your country, that's tailored for what you need. And then you interact with another country, and it all goes to hell very, very quickly. So we push trade deals that reflect our light government touch, and the rest of Europe is like, what? Why would we do that? Why would we take all of these gains and just throw them out the window? And then, of course, the Chinese see it as a battle. Well, let me give you the obvious ones, and then we can talk about the ones I hope for. So there are a number of countries around the world who realize that the security paradigm of their home is dependent upon having a bigger friend somewhere else. And it's not that they're security consumers. It's just that they understand that there's a certain scratch each other's backs. So top of the list, Australia. Culturally, they are the most similar country to us. Physically, they're the furthest away, and they've got a great chunk of land that kind of sits across from any number of regions that we're going to care about. First and foremost on that list is Southeast Asia, who I kind of see coming along for the ride and being part of a post-globalized American neo-trading network. Japan was in the wind for a while. Japan's always been its own thing, but under Trump basically threatened all the allies that he would withdraw troops unless they ponied up. And while most countries dithered and deferred, the Japanese tipped us. And then as soon as Biden came in, they cut another deal with Biden. So any world leaders who can cut a deal with Trump and Biden, that tells you that across the entire American political spectrum, they're comfortable.
Japanese are pretty practical people.
Absolutely. Well, they are now. Japan, for example, was the third country to sign up for the Russia sanctions. That is not something they would have done 10 years ago, much less 40 years ago. So Japan is now in kind of the friends and family program that I consider.
Yeah.
The UK is desperately trying to figure out what Brexit means. And once they do, they realize they're going to have to apply for NAFTA membership, and we will allow them in with certain conditions, just like we have done with every other deal we've ever cut with them. Scandinavia looks pretty good.
Yeah.
It didn't 5 years ago, but the Russia war and the Finns and the Swedes rushing to get into NATO has changed minds up there. So whether it's Denmark, Sweden, Finland, or Norway, or Iceland, I think they're going to be part of the network as well. The two that are likely, but some things have to be worked out, France. The French will always be French. That's part of their charm.
Yeah.
But they are an independent military. They never sunk their economy into the globalized system.
No.
And they have very firm ideas about how Western Europe should operate. And they really don't care about the rest of the world so much. So
Yeah.
they're
French.
Exactly. It's a situation where we have a lot in common, and the places where we clash are not core interests for either of us.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I'm most concerned about, but ultimately is most important in the long term, is Mexico. They're our largest trading partner. They're our second largest demographic partner. The southern border of the U.S. is the most crossed border in the world before you consider the illegal migration.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is the most important economic access in the world for the next century. I would like for us to get along a little bit better. The two things that would need to change is that people like the Mexican president AMLO just need to go away. And number two, Americans really need to stop snorting cocaine. If we could get those two things changed, things would be so much better. The birth rate fell out of Mexico and Central America about 20 years ago. So I don't mean to suggest that this is not an issue of the moment. I'm telling you, it's not going to be an issue of 10 years from now, because there
even
children.
Central America.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit later than Mexico, but a sharper drop off. And
that's the really urbanization trends.
Yeah, exactly. Urbanization is a big piece of it. So I don't mean to suggest that migration from the South is going to stop, but the idea that there can be mass waves, they're not going to have the folks for it. I mean, I look at the candidates that are in there, and obviously there's a political decision to be made here, and that will shape the country. But it's not like this is someone like AMLO, and it's certainly not someone like Fidel. There's a broad agreement across the ideological aisle in Colombia that they're at a moment of decision. And Chile was in this a few years ago too. It's up to them how they treat it, but they already have a trade deal with the United States. Mm-hmm. So the hard stuff is done. It's a question about what the shape of the future looks like, and that is their decision to make.